When a woman walks away, walking away from someone you once gave your heart to never feels like an act of power. At least not at first. It feels like a funeral, a silent one. The kind where the other person doesn't even realize what they've lost. Not until much later, when the echo of your absence starts to sound like truth. You doubt yourself. You wonder if it ever really meant anything. But here's the truth. When a woman walks away not out of anger or revenge, but for peace, a fracture opens in a man's psyche. Even if he doesn't show it, it happens. Carl Jung believed that every relationship is a reflection of the inner world. So when she leaves, she doesn't just leave him. She breaks the mirror he once used to see himself. And many don't realize what they've truly lost until that mirror lies shattered on the floor. Even if you're alone right now, half listening, let this message play. Jung taught that the unconscious is always listening. So whether you're cooking, walking, lying in bed, your mind will absorb what it needs. And if you've ever walked away from a man and wondered what he truly felt beneath the silence, the sarcasm, the pride, this is for you. Because underneath all that noise, there's far more than you think. If this message resonates, consider subscribing. Not because you owe me anything, but because you deserve a space that honors what you feel, what you give, and what you choose to release. Here's the thing about ego. It feels the collapse first, not the loss. When a woman walks away, the first thing a man feels isn't sadness or love or even loneliness. It's a wounded ego. That's what breaks first. Not his soul, his sense of control. Carl Jung once said, "The ego is the image we present to the world. It's who we think we are or who we want others to see." And in many relationships, especially when the man hasn't done the inner work, his sense of worth is tied to one thing: how much power he has over your emotions. As long as you keep replying, explaining, trying, he feels safe. Not necessarily loved, just in control. That's why when you finally walk away, when you fall silent, when you stop insisting, stop being available, you don't just interrupt his routine. You shake the very foundation of who he believes he islanded. Because the male ego often mistakes your availability for approval. If you're still there, he assumes he still matters, that he's still desired. But your absence, that tells a different story. It screams, you no longer orbit my emotional universe. At first, that doesn't hurt him. Not in the way you might expect. It irritates him. It bruises his pride. It makes him feel slighted, maybe even insulted. He may act indifferent, cold, sarcastic, distant. But that reaction, that isn't strength. It's defense, a mask. Because deep down, he's realizing something terrifying. He no longer has access to you, and he doesn't know what to do with that. Most men aren't taught how to handle emotional grief. They're taught to win, to take, to control. So when a woman leaves, not with drama, but with calm, she deactivates all his strategies. There's no argument to win, no conversation to dominate, no ground to take, only silence. And in that silence, the illusion of control crumbles. That's when real change begins. He may not name it as grief, not yet, but something inside him is unraveling. And it all starts the moment the role he's been playing, the man he thought he was, begins to fall apart. Especially if he once felt like a man because of your love. Now, he's left asking, who am I without her validation? And that question haunts him, far more than he'll ever admit. Because when you're gone, his shadow awakens. Carl Jung called it the shadow, that unconscious place where we bury everything we deny in ourselves. And when a woman leaves, the shadow rises. The shadow awakens when she leaves. Insecurities, fears, wounds, emotions. Most men were taught to repress them, to bury them deep. For many, the shadow becomes a vault, A hidden space where everything unspoken is stored. Neediness, vulnerability, shame, the quiet fear of never being enough. And while you were there, loving him, soothing him, holding space for his silences, his shadow stayed quiet, asleep, contained, silenced by your presence. But the moment you walk away, the shadow wakes up. Why? Because you're no longer there to cushion what he didn't want to feel. Your absence removed the escape route. There's no one left to absorb his emptiness. No comfort waiting for him at the end of a hard day. And then, for the first time in a long time, he begins to hear himself. Really hear. The questions start to rise from somewhere deep. Why did she leave? Why couldn't I take care of her? What part of me pushed her away? Even if he tries to distract himself, even if he smiles in public, talks to others, posts as if nothing happened, your silence lingers. It follows him like an echo. Not loud, but constant. He doesn't miss you out of need. He misses you because his shadow is finally speaking. And that voice is not sweet. It's brutal, honest, unrelenting. He may never say it out loud, but he feels the shift. He knows what he lost wasn't ordinary. And even if he tries to convince himself otherwise, deep down he knows. He knows you were his chance. To grow, to love from a different place. And he didn't take it. Carl Jung once said, "The healing process begins when we face our shadow and stop projecting it." But the truth is, some men only meet their shadow when a woman leaves. It's not a graceful process. It's raw, humbling, necessary. Your silence becomes his revelation. And when he's left alone with everything you used to hold together, he realizes just how much of himself you carry in your hands. Regret doesn't come loudly. Most people assume that when a woman walks away, a man will feel regret immediately. But regret doesn't knock on the door with urgency. It doesn't scream. It doesn't come dressed in drama. No. Regret arrives late, quiet, like a shadow slipping through the cracks. Jung taught that the unconscious mind takes time to reveal what the ego works hard to hide. And the ego, it clings to pride, to excuses, to the ever useful, it wasn't that bad. That's why right after you leave, he doesn't feel guilt or sorrow or loss. He feels distraction. He fills the spaces you left, goes out, talks to other women, posts things meant more for himself than anyone else. He tells the world and himself, "I'm fine. I'm better off." But regret doesn't care about appearances. It waits. It waits for the noise to die down, for the attention to fade, for the compliments to stop. It waits until he's alone, in his house, in his bed, in his thoughts, until the room is too quiet, until he hears that song you loved, or walks past the cafe where you used to laugh. And then regret enters, not as a sharp pain, but as a deep, haunting emptiness. He doesn't miss you on the surface. He misses your energy, your calm, your loyalty. He misses the way you understood him, even when he didn't understand himself. He misses what you built together, the way you took care of him, believed in him, when he couldn't believe in himself. But here's the part that hits the hardest. By the time he realizes all of this, you've already begun to heal. You've rebuilt your center. You've planted new roots. You've created a life that no longer revolves around his gravity. And that's why regret, for him, doesn't feel like, "I want to come back." It feels like, "I can't go back anymore." The quiet mirror of regret is like watching a door slowly close, knowing he'll never be able to walk through it again. Carl Jung once said, "The human soul only changes when the pain of staying the same exceeds the fear of changing." And that's what regret does. It doesn't come loud. It doesn't break the door down. It waits. It settles deep in the soul and makes a home there. Because regret forces him to face what he didn't want to admit. That he didn't just lose someone, he lost you. And in losing you, he lost the chance to grow with you. Your absence becomes a mirror. One of the hardest truths Carl Jung ever offered is this. We don't see the world as an island, we see it as we are. That's why, when a woman leaves, she doesn't just leave behind silence or space, she leaves behind a mirror. And that mirror doesn't reflect who he pretended to be. It reflects who he truly islanded. At first, he might look into that mirror and see nothing wrong. He'll still hear the voice of ego. She was too sensitive, too intense, too demanding. But over time, the reflection becomes clearer. Because the longer your absence lingers, the more undeniable the truth becomes. The problem wasn't you. It was you who held things together. It was you who waited. You who endured far more than you should have. And now that mirror shows him everything he didn't want to see. The times he ignored your needs. The moments he pulled away when you reached out for closeness. The promises he never kept. The emotional fear he never faced while you stayed still trying. This is where shame appears. And Jung said, shame is a great teacher. Shame doesn't just say, you did something wrong. It whispers something far more cutting. You weren't enough. Even if it's not entirely true, the feeling slices deep. Especially if he ever felt more like a man when you were beside him. When you admired him, when you pushed him forward, when you believed in him, even when he couldn't believe in himself. Now, without your gaze, without your trust, without your steady support, he's exposed. And he's left with the most painful question of all. Why couldn't I become the man she saw in me? At that point, many men start to remember, not the grand gestures, not the trips or the gifts. They remember the quiet things. The way you looked at them when they opened up, the sound of your voice when they were in crisis, the times you showed up when they didn't. And what they feel then isn't just loss, it's failure. Because Jung taught that when we lose someone who reflected who we could have become, it's not just their absence that hurts, it's the realization that we weren't able to rise to it. That's why he doesn't just miss you, he misses a version of himself that only existed when you believed in him. And now that this version has nowhere to live, nowhere to be projected, all that remains is the reflection of a man who once held something rare and didn't know how to care for it. Your absence becomes a silent witness, a reminder without words that you didn't fail. He failed to protect what was given to him unconditionally. Not every man changes. And here lies the final truth. Some men change. Most don't. Not every man transforms just because you walked away. And maybe that's one of the hardest truths to accept. Maybe you hoped your silence would be a wake-up call, that your absence would stir something inside him. That, with time, he'd realize what he lost, and that realization would become growth. And sometimes it does, but many times it doesn't. Jung believed that true transformation, what he called individuation, only begins when a person is ready to face and accept their shadow. And that kind of change isn't automatic. It doesn't happen by accident. It takes humility. It takes responsibility. It takes pain. Above all, it takes the courage to stop blaming others and start looking inward. And so, while you walk forward, building a life that's lighter, fuller, truer, he's left with the echo of what was and what could have been, not just with you, but with the man he never became, the fork in his path. And this is where most men stumble. Because when a woman leaves, he is faced with two paths, grow or repeat. Some men stop. They reflect. They begin to see the pattern. They understand why they sabotage themselves, why they run the moment love becomes real, why they pull away just as something authentic begins to form. These men don't transform overnight, but the emotional blow wakes them up, and they don't change to win you back. They change because they finally realize they can't keep living as the man who let someone like you slip away. But others, they take the other path. They replace quickly. They project their emptiness onto the next person. They change partners, but not their patterns. They tell themselves you were too intense, that you asked for too much, that you weren't all that special. And in doing so, they dim the mirror your absence had left shining. They move on, but they don't grow. Their relationships may look new, but the story stays the same. The same fears, the same excuses, the same wounds, untouched. And even if they smile, even if they seem fine, they know what they lost. Because what you gave wasn't ordinary. It wasn't performative or transactional. It was sincere giving. It was patience. It was depth. It was love that waited and asked for nothing but honesty in return. And they let it go. So what does he feel when you leave? At first, nothing. Then ego. Then shame. And after that, it depends on who he island. Either transformation or repetition. Because your absence becomes a silent fork in his path. And how he responds to that silence reveals whether he was ever truly ready to become the man you already saw inside him. Leaving isn't power, it's proof. There's this idea, this myth, that when the woman leaves, it's to win. That walking away is a performance of strength. That there's some watch me shine without you energy. And yes, sometimes that's part of the story. But many times, the truth is softer and more painful. You didn't leave to prove anything. You left because you had nothing left to give. Carl Jung said, real love is born from deep vulnerability. And when the woman stays through the silence, through the contradictions, through the emptiness, it's not because she lacks dignity. It's because she loves, because she sees possibilities, because she hopes, because she believes again and again, until that giving becomes a form of survival, until staying becomes a quiet abandonment of herself. So when you finally left, it wasn't because you stopped feeling. It was because, for the first time in a long time, you finally began to feel for yourself. Leaving wasn't revenge, it was healing. And that decision, to walk away, it wasn't revenge, it was healing. But don't mistake that for ease. Because leaving someone you once loved with your whole soul is one of the hardest things a woman can do. Not because the love disappeared, but because it was real. Because your giving was honest, complete. And what it feels when you leave isn't just your absence. It's the echo of everything you carried in silence. Every moment you stayed while he shut down. Every conversation you held together while he avoided. Every time you bet on both of you while he only ever bet on himself. He doesn't just lose a woman. He loses the version of himself that only ever existed within the safety of your love. And when that version disappears, what he mourns isn't just you. It's who he could have become by your side. Leaving wasn't a power move. It was the final act of love. This wasn't about proving something. It wasn't about pride. It wasn't even about strength. It was the final act of a love that whispered, I would have stayed if only you'd met me halfway. But this part of the story is no longer about what he feels. It's about what you can finally feel without shrinking yourself for someone who refused to grow. Leaving doesn't mean you didn't love him. It means you finally loved yourself enough to stop begging to be seen. Carl Jung once said, you are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to become. And when you leave, not with hate, not with drama, not with some final plea to be understood, but with silence, you choose to return to yourself. Not because he deserved to lose you, but because you deserve to return whole. If you feel something, maybe not today, maybe not in the way you imagined, the impact is still there, growing in the background, resonating in the silence. Because that silence you left behind speaks louder than any word you ever tried to say. So if you've already left, or you're standing on the edge, let this be your reminder. You are not the villain for choosing peace. You are not cold for setting boundaries. You are not weak for holding on so long. You are brave for finally letting go of what no longer wanted to grow with you. If this message touched something in you, subscribe. Not for this channel, for yourself. Because you deserve content that sees what's inside you. That speaks to the part of you that's tired of being strong in silence. And in the comments, tell me, what was it that finally made you leave? And what have you discovered about yourself since you did? Because your story matters, and your healing begins here.